Well, thank you all. Like I said, thank you for joining us for this post lunch breakout session. We have some really great panelists. A few of them I've had the pleasure of working with before and hosting panels with them, speaking on them before. So talking about more really cool things happening in AI and the workforce. We have a slate of great folks. I will let them do a quick intro and kind of just say who they are and why they're part of this panel today to give you a little context, and then we'll kick things off. Let's start with the folks online. Karen, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hey, everyone. How are you? I'm so bummed that I couldn't be there in person, but happy to join you virtually. My name is Karen Howard. I am currently the Director of the Office of Online Services at the IRS, and I'm very excited about this topic. Everyone's talking about AI, and I love to get my 2 cents in. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you. Patrick?
Okay. You guys hear me?
Mhm.
Absolutely. So I'm Patrick Johnson. I am with the DoD CIO, and I am the Workforce Innovation Director. And we're excited. We've been working with and developing different AI tools for at least the past 2.5 years and employing them on the human capital front. So this is an excellent opportunity to talk about lessons learned, some of the things we've encountered along the way, and share with the group. And we're excited about the deployment of the tools we're putting out.
Excellent. Then we'll switch over to in the room. Tony, you want to go first?
Sure. Hello, my name is Tony Bosey. I'm here in the role of government chair for the AI and data policy work group for ATARC. I'm on this panel because my other me, who is not here today, my INI, I guess you'd call it if you like severance, is an individual who runs large interagency workforce development programs. Before that was an academic for some time and also ran some businesses before that, and have made it my priority to best understand as possible how to make persons better and more capable as efficiently and fairly as we can.
Hi, my name is Brian Mayer. I'm a research scientist and research manager at Virginia Tech, part of a Sangani Center for Artificial Intelligence and Data Analytics. I work with faculty trying to develop solutions that are trying to develop techniques that we can then translate into solutions to help partners and collaborators. I do a lot of work with that interaction between who we're working with and the faculty that are developing these novel and newly theoretical solutions. And a lot of the work we do is specifically about enhancing the cognitive ability of the humans, not just creating something that can replace or can do what humans already can do.
Everyone hear me okay? I'm Josh. I'm here with Prion, one of the vendors. We essentially try to help create knowledge agents to help augment and support knowledge work, heavily invested in the federal government currently across intelligence, DoD, a couple of the IL5, 6, 4 spaces too as well. Previously with Google, been in ML AI for about 15 years. I'm here to help represent. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Why don't we kind of get a lay of the land here and talk about what are some of the key opportunities that we're seeing AI presenting for the workforce from your perspective? And I'm going to throw it to the online folks first, just to mitigate confusion going back and forth. Karen, you want to give it a shot?
Sure. Great question. When I look at some of the things we're trying with AI and some of the things we're experiencing, I think some of the key opportunities are going to be workforce automation, really looking at those tasks that are routine, that are repetitive, and trying to automate those. I think another opportunity that we've seen is workforce advancements, right? It allows us to develop and reskill and upskill employees to bring more value to their work and to their ultimate value for actually being marketable in the job place. Another one I would think is the ability to quickly identify performance and drive performance rating integrity. So, using AI to help, understand benchmark performance levels and who may be lagging, who is exceeding everyone, and trying to balance that out with peer mentoring or additional training. I would say one of the last things that I would speak to on this topic is enhancing and expediting decision makings with evidence-based data analytics. And I think AI has brought really, really good and strong analytics where decisions are evidence-based and can be validated and defended with data, as opposed to, who has the largest title in the room, who has, the biggest paycheck. And I think that's very important, especially as we look to continue to grow and evolve in the AI space.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Patrick, any thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. So, ditto on what Karen just said. Here's what we're doing. So, we're using AI in several different ways, but ultimately from the DoD lens. And if you look at some of the efficiency actions that are taking place right now, AI allows me to take my workforce and multiply their capability. We can be in more places, do more things without increasing the number of people. And I notice I said, I'm not talking about taking people off the board. We're able to achieve more with what we have. So that's the first thing. We're using it in determining qualifications. We're able to fit all of our information in. We use work roles to manage the cyber workforce. Putting that information in, letting it to assist us when we're benchmarking, looking at things, comparing to HR actions, working toward being able to automate, creating position descriptions. So it's a holistic approach. We haven't replaced the human being. And I look at the human being, how do we take the human operating system, the individual, and better integrate it with the technology? And it's really that advent when we're bringing the large language models to the table, the natural language model. It allows the human operating system to interact with that quicker, more efficiently. And of course, we're still learning and teaching the workforce how to leverage these tools. But we're deploying tools right now, and we're looking to kind of step that up.
Excellent. Thoughts from the panel on,
Sure.
okay, go ahead.
So a thing that exists, a program that speaks to this is something called the Aspire program that I've read about online and in the news. The Aspire program uses AI to very specifically and acutely diagnose and identify an individual's knowledge gaps and then seeks to repair them specifically. And all of this is enabled by AI. Without AI, it would be extraordinarily labor intensive to try to go through and get the level of specificity the system talks about. It is a very good system. It is arguably the best that exists, or at least a couple years ago, it was demonstrably and verifiably the best that exists. And yet there's challenges. And I think that one thing I want to bring to the table here is not just what we're doing, but what we need on advice of a good friend. And some of the things we need for this, and I don't know what people in the room could do to help, and maybe they can, is to try to get increased intra-governmental partnership. Two key partners of Aspire were Air Force and Navy. About 2 months ago, I started talking to the Defense Language Institute, who is literally 1.5 miles up the road from our major partner, NPS. Didn't even know Aspire was happening, wasting time and money trying to recreate the same ground that we just went over. Tried to cooperate with CDAO. I heard that didn't go very well. Had other problems coordinating within other agencies because the government is just not built to work with itself. It never has been. And by design, it isn't. And if we want to do things like increase efficiency and save cost, whether or not you do it for political reason or just because you believe it's economically responsible, we need to do better at that cooperation. I think we also, the second half of that is public-private cooperation. There are an awful lot of companies out there in this room right now that have a lot that they could bring to government, a lot of assets they could use to help propel government. And there might be reasons to not do so. Whatever. There's also a lot of knowledge and insights in government that could be brought to the private sector, and we can collaborate. We don't just have to have you sell us stuff and, sorry, not us, you sell the government stuff and the government buys stuff from you. Like, we can collaborate. We can do CRADAs, we can do SIBR and sitters and sponsor your research. And those sorts of things I think would also be extremely valuable to consider. If we really want to do this right and we really want to use AI well, how we can do so more cooperatively within government and in the private public context.
I think what I'll speak to is both what was mentioned in the last two pieces, in the sense of one, helping the models having AI help the humans do something that they maybe couldn't do before. And I think even our representative from the Department of State earlier today said they have too much information. And I would argue it's not too much information, it's just too much information for the human to comprehend. So making sure that that the human can perceive all of that information, or that information is perceived and potentially acted on if possible, or presented to the human when necessary. Additionally, kind of as you mentioned, we want the model to kind of understand the human as well. So it's a full loop there. The model needs to understand what the human is. So as Patrick mentioned, some of that can happen with the natural language interface. We have done research before we had this kind of natural language, this awesome natural language interface where we could do that as well. So there are other ways to kind of understand the model. In addition, as well, even though that natural language interface allows us to communicate, there is some unknown, because we may be getting a response from the model, but that response may not be what actually is the case. So there is some we need to increase the understanding of what these models are. So again, going back to some of the techniques that we were using before we had this generative AI, and expanding those to this new technology that we have, and say, how do we make this technology understandable so that people that one either can't understand all the data they have, or wouldn't know where to even start, and just are looking for help. How do we make it usable for them so that they can understand it, and then not just take the solution that's provided to them, but take the information that's provided to them and create a more knowledgeable and effective or appropriate solution from that information.
Sure. I think everyone else pretty much said everything. The summarization of that, no pun intended for LLMs and such, is I think the big change here is access. So previously speaking, we had these notions of, and there's a couple of paradigms here: transacting, pick something up, buy, trade, not really collaborating. There's certain levels of privacy and security and stuff that's still required. But even when you have access to it, there's too much information. How do you make sense of, and take action on the information? That's what's changing very quickly. The AIs, it's not one AI, and we talked about personalization, a couple other elements here. It's actually multiple AIs taking on different parts of the function, like a factory, like a workforce, like an organization, to be able to hand off to each other in very quick succession. So that when you come up with a request, they can be executed very quickly. The request can be broken down into find me something relevant. That's one part. Another part is make sense of this, synthesize something from it. Great. There's another part that says, even if you have that, does that corroborate with the other party that you're collaborating with? And that might even be not even just a human, but another AI that's then talking to each other, right? So the people start becoming more of the owners of the process, the policy, the outcomes that we're looking for, rather than waiting on the execution function to be able to come through. So access is kind of the main thing I would put as a big change for generative AI versus some of the more legacy, methods that we used to go through.
It strikes me as, just in response to the very first question right off the bat, there's a very clear common thread here, even though we touched on a lot of different points, which is the human element and kind of the interplay between AI and humans, employees. When you were talking about, is it the Aspire program for assessing and improving knowledge gaps? It made me think of one day I was feeling, not super motivated, and I was like asking ChatGPT to be like my personal cheerleader, and like playing around with like prompts for it to kind of get me, like keep me on task, and because I read that other people, I Googled it and I saw that other people were doing it. I don't know if that's what's being done here, but it does make me wonder, what are some of the human challenges that we are starting to address with AI, and how are we doing that? And kind of just looking at it from that human element perspective, what are those efficiencies and effective ways to improve using AI? And not everybody has to answer if you don't want to. I will, Karen or Patrick, do either of you want to take a first crack at that?
Go ahead, Patrick. I'm interested to hear.
No. Look,
Karen not answer a question.
Not to get ahead of everything, but when you go to roll this out, the kind of the first thing, people look at it, and I've actually, as we've put tools in front of them, and the question that one of the first questions was like, this is really cool, but if it does that, what do I do? And I'm like, well, first in my mind, you're thinking too small. And if that's your chief concern, you've got bigger problems. So it's about showing people and saying, you're coming into the conversation and say, your job, you do these things. All right. What is the most distasteful part of your job? And if you'll look at any job, especially on the federal side of the house, generally it's what I call nug work, where you're going through tons of policy or regulations. You're comparing and looking at that, or you're ingesting a large amount of data and trying to put it in different buckets. If I do a tool that is going to do all of that and free you up to do the creative part. AI does the manual, the drudgery really, really well and really, really fast. But it's not, I'll just give it to AI and let AI do it. We're not there yet. So it's a matter of, this is going to take your limited resources and free you up to do the things that you do and do really well. And you don't have to spend a lot of time on things that you really just hate doing. And that has ramifications, especially when you're working with stakeholders. Suddenly you're turning around products quicker, and you're doing it with a whole lot less error. It's a multiplier across the board. So that's the kind of way I look at it. How do you sell this, and then how do you create capabilities, again, for the human operating system that will make them more efficient?
One of the things that I think about in response to that question is, and I always go back to it because I think it offers up a great framework for change and disruption, is, change management and the ADKAR model for awareness. If you follow that model and make tweaks as it, relies or is respectful to your organization, you can get adoption and people embracing new technology. The first thing, that awareness piece is so important. And I think that's the piece that most people miss. And Patrick alluded to this, letting people know what's coming and what's the vision, and then getting into that win-win. How does it benefit you? Ensuring the workforce also plays kind of a part in the solution once they understand where we're trying to go. So things aren't happening to them, they're happening with them, and they feel like their opinion matters. Making sure that, there's communication, transparency, and a really good feedback loop, so that they're providing constant feedback on what they're seeing, good, bad, and different. And you're actually taking that into consideration as you continue to communicate, interact.
And I think, Karen, a good example, and I'm probably overstepping my time, but we had an intake process where we looked at certification offerings and training offerings, and we were comparing that to our workforce requirements and standards. And it would take on average 3, sometimes 4 months for a group of human beings to go through that. And maybe we could get through, 20 or 30 cert offerings. We flipped that around and automate it, and we're able to do that now for hundreds, if not thousands, of offerings. And we're able to do that in as little as a day, where the AI rolls that through. Actually, it's doing it in a matter of 5 or 10 minutes and then rolls it back. And there's still a human being in that process, but that greatly sped up our input.
So great, thank you. Anybody at the panel, the live panel?
Sure. I think so this isn't like a new problem. Automation has been going on, I don't know, last 100 years in a variety of different ways. One of the things I think people don't touch on early enough, there's phases of it as you're cascading into digital transformation through an organization. One of the first phases a lot of times that I found, especially on the commercial side as well, is actually satisfaction within the groups and the people and the jobs that they're doing. Everyone everywhere has parts of their jobs that is not fun. It's required, it's necessary, but it's not fun, right? This frees up many of those parts of those jobs when implemented well. So there's a bit of a process management and project management element to this that has to go successfully for everyone else to see the satisfaction on the ground floor, the ground level. But typically speaking, the satisfaction comes pretty quickly when people realize they can start focusing more on the things that they actually find interesting about the job, or the things that they find compelling, the reasons why they sign up or they stick with it, you know, so on and so forth. Because just like any relationship with your spouse or your job, there's ups and downs, but it gets rid of a lot of the noise and the muddledness of stuff that isn't that interesting pretty quickly, actually. The downside to it is you can get a lot more of that throughput now through the organization. So you have to have really good QA and quality assurance to check for that, right? Including the people involved. So there's like a double-edged sword. You can increase satisfaction, but you can also kind of, you know, not if you have that good project management part. So anyways, just leave it on the project management kind of leads us towards the human satisfaction, the human element of like why people would buy in from an organization.
Good point.
I'm gonna jump in real quick. So if we bring some of this back to the notion of not just for the workforce, but for workforce development, and just in case. When we think about the actual application of AI to workforce development, I think that there's a few things that have been mentioned, particularly by Karen, well, by the three speakers before me, no reason to name names. And that is this notion about like personalization and what's in it for me and how do I see value in it. And I think one thing that AI gives us an opportunity to do when it comes to sorting and serving offerings quickly and capably, like Patrick mentioned, is it gives us an opportunity, and one I think we should take, to give persons who are going through even some of the most humdrum training options to do maybe a little bit more, a little bit different, or something that intrigues them, or to take maybe little side courses or additional things. You know, say, hey, you've got to do your firm requirements first, but did you think that little section on LLMs was cool? Maybe here's a little more training and reading on LLMs. Oh, are you a new seaman and you thought like, oh, all that basic sonar stuff was cool. Maybe I want to be a sonarman. You know, maybe we can let you start exploring that direction. Right? These are things that would be so difficult to do on an individual and reliable basis with old technology, or especially manually. But with AI, we can do those things. And I think that'll help people get not only be more engaged and more informed, but it makes them more capable. You know, every little extra bit of knowledge just gives us a more capable warfighter, a more capable government employee, a more capable student, et cetera.
So I think I like the point kind of that we've been going through this automation for a long time, and my background's actually in process improvement. So yes, we do a lot of this. A lot of what we're used to is, and what we've talked about today, is helping people accept and learn what the benefits are to them and be open to that. I think that's, and one thing we may get to the point where we forget, well, the next step is then once they see the benefits of it, we need to make, and in a lot of cases we still do, we educate them on, okay, well, what are the limitations of this as well, so that you don't go use it for something you're not supposed to. What are the risks? What, like, potentially is there a privacy or cybersecurity risk as well? One concern that might be becoming more of an issue is the fact that, well, if people automatically see these risks, because we talk about, well, maybe as Patrick mentioned, like the LLM is a little bit more accessible to people. So they might know like, oh yes, this is going to be helpful. I'm going to jump in and start using it. If they're not aware of the limitations, then they might be using it for things that they shouldn't be using. And I think obviously that there certainly is information like that out there. So hopefully that is being prevalent, and I mean, we are working on ways to educate people as well. But I think that's certainly something that we need to do. And I'd say to the point of how do we kind of, what is there to work on in these human loops and human and machine loops? I think potentially, again, what was relevant potentially before generative AI is a lot of times and people might be familiar with it if you're familiar with a social media feed, it informs you of things that it thinks you want to know. And a lot of times that's based off of the things that you already have interest in. So if it's making suggestions to you, or if it thinks, hey, this stuff is important, potentially it's just reinforcing the information you have instead of going out and finding different things. So it's kind of it's kind of reinforcing your bias. How that has extended a similar phenomenon that's extended into generative AI is they are sycophantic. They want to, the way that they are created, then trained, it's motivated to please you. So it thinks an answer of yes is better than an answer. When in doubt, an answer of yes is better than an answer of no. So that's a concern that we have to continue to address.
I think that makes sense. Something that kind of stands out to me, the talking about the personalization, what's in it for me, the examples that you gave about, being able to kind of parse out individual interests. I think there's a clear case here for how AI can improve efficiency and effectiveness in the workforce on a very individualized level, which collectively would be, we should be able to see improvements there. I wonder about, especially when you're integrating it with other solutions, cloud, the rest of the tools and technologies that you're using every day as a member of the workforce. What does it look like to enhance governance and service delivery? What does that look like? Okay, so we're improving and further optimizing the workforce, and the workforce is happier and more productive and more motivated. Okay, so what happens when we bring in all the other required parts of the job, like the software that they have to use and the tools that they have to work with every day? What if they, hate Office 365 or Teams or whatever, and they have to use that? It's just one example. But bringing in these, more advanced management tools that are subject to governance and service delivery, how do we see AI playing a role in leveling that up as well, not just the workforce itself? Karen or Patrick, either of you have initial thoughts on that?
I have some initial thoughts, and I think this answers some of what you're asking. For us, especially for the Office of Online Service, we're always looking at our external customers and their experience that resonates back to the employee experience. So when you look at integrating AI into things like, turning live person into chat bots or voice bots from an AI perspective, that really helps reduce the call center burden and the burden on, these in-person contacts, which then helps drive efficiency on the back end. Those employees can be repurposed and reskilled. But more than like the customer on the front end of that tool and that integration of AI gets more accurate and more confident information. So another area that we look at when we're doing this is the detection of returns, tax returns, right, and the frequency and potential fraud indicators. And AI is much better at doing that than people trying to do that. And so again, that allows the people who are doing it to actually be the brains behind, because AI has to be trained. So they move into more prompting and more training of the tool, and that brings that integration of the tools we've used before and a way to do it much faster and quicker. Some of the lessons that we got into learning is, and I think everyone has already said it, but ensure there's a balance of automation and human oversight, right? Sometimes if you swing too far one way or too far the other way, you end up landing a little bit flat-footed and having to do some corrections. And this also helps to minimize some of those false positives that you might see, biases, hallucinations, and some of the other things that AI in these early stages we're seeing. If we're not careful, then it defeats our purpose for having it. I also think user experience is critical when you talk about these integrations of AI into tools that you have now. Someone has to make sure that the AI is making it easier, is making it simpler, so that continuously refining to ensure the accuracy of the information and reduce the frustration on the user experience is critical. And that again brings value to the people who've done that job before. From a manual perspective, they become the brains behind training the automation. Over to you, Patrick.
I'm almost tempted to say what she said. When we're looking at the department has been slow in adopting AI. We were really concerned about being, the functional lead for our cyber workforce from a cybersecurity standpoint, kind of opening these things up. I think as we've continued down the road, greater understanding kind of what it brings, and that it's, you can bring different things online. You can isolate that, what that impact is. So when we look at cybersecurity operations, we look at the cyber sphere within our mission force. We have offensive operations, we have defensive operations that go well beyond just looking for intrusions. And it takes a different skill set for each one of those things. So you can bring great automation in for the defensive side in terms of identifying anomalies. But just as Karen said, you're going to kick those anomalies over to a human being to start that analysis and that process. It makes it much faster, and it brings us, I think, a greater accuracy where we can identify these things. On the same token, we're looking at some of the automation we've built, and you talked about the bots. Still, a lot of people hate the bots because you'll ask it a question. I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're asking me, or it gives you something. So there's a process, and it's where we're building and working with this. What I started with, we were out on AWS, and learning to interface, cut down the latency on some of these things, get that data. The first couple of hallucinations kind of sent me for a roll. I'm like, what did it just do? I'm not that smart, so I'm working with the developers, and they're like, it's just a hallucination. This is how we're going to work that through. So we've focused on the cybersecurity piece of that, using models that are isolated, okay, with DoD data. It's important. Bad data in, bad data out. Increasing that, and then when we interact, that reinforcement loop, because it does. AI will present stuff. Take the time to go back. It's not what we're looking for. Retrain and focus. The biggest thing is the more data you can get in, the more throughput, the better it learns.
How about you guys here on stage? What do you all think?
I suppose that I think the greatest immediate win with AI will be to use its quick reasoning ability and ability to solve puzzles to find efficiencies, to make better use out of those pieces of firm infrastructure that are otherwise slow or difficult to get more of. So for a health situation, consider a surgery suite or the surgery theater. Surgery theaters are very hard to build. They're very expensive. You're not just going to pop another one onto a building randomly. But what you could do is use AI to get more efficient surgery scheduling to get more use out of the surgery theaters you have, right? We have subs. Subs have a blue team, gold team. There's a transfer time between blue and gold. It's probably the only time that sub is not in the water. Can we make that faster, get more time with subs deployed, perhaps? Planes, expensive. We don't have enough of them. Can we get more efficient at getting planes in and out of either military hangars or civilian airports with AI? Probably. Again, it helps us not have to worry about those limited infrastructure, and also really from like a cost perspective, easier to get more efficiency than to pay for new. From an environmental perspective, huge environmental impact to build a surgery feed, build an MRI, build an airplane. Not a negligible environmental impact, but a much smaller one to run an efficiency driving AI to help these things. I really think that that's where we should look. I know the VA, where my INI works, does a lot of this, like just trying to push efficiency in surgery, trying to push efficiency for the doctors, trying to get more out of the most limited resources.
Open to you.
One of the things we were talking about here was trying to have AI humans and the other systems work together. We're talking about things like, Office and other, centers of record or other systems across other groups. One of the key concepts here is actually control and like reliability. We already touched on this a few points through hallucinations in other groups. There's different categories of things that can happen where the AI is just not effective. That's actually where a lot of vendors are doing really well at trying to plug in. That's specifically what we actually do at Prion, is the control element, being able to feed the right information at the right time to the right part of the process to be able to get the best results out of the AIs, and something that's closer to more deterministic, at least more predictable. That's where the two things are going to come hand in hand, is having clear understanding of policy and being able to blend that in with the control mechanisms to be able to put boundaries or guardrails on these things.
Good points.
I really don't have too much to add, but I'll say one thing in that there are new model or new tools, I'll say models that are actually basically adapting generative AI to actually learn how to interact in a user environment. So basically move the mouse, click here, type this, select this, change this. So again, something very new. So I don't want to talk about it too much, but that could answer as well.
Thank you. No, I think all good points. It kind of reminds me of two things, and these are not necessarily questions. For one, your point about hospitals made me think of I did career day at my kids' school a couple weeks ago, but I did it like as in my semi-recovering journalist capacity. I didn't tell them the semi-recovering part. I just talked about being a journalist, but they had me paired up with a Naval X guy who was telling them about aircraft carriers and how an aircraft carrier has at least one hospital on board, which I actually did not know that. And I thought that was really interesting. And so when you gave that example just now, you actually can't build out, really, most likely, you can't further build out anything in a hospital that is on an aircraft carrier. So it seems like that would be a good place where what you're talking about would make sense. And I don't know if anybody read Sebastian Junger's most recent book, where he had this near-death experience. Sebastian Junger is a famous war correspondent. He wrote this book about this near-death experience that he had, and it was what happened to him was like such an anomaly and would have been so impossible to find. It's like amazing that it happened. I do recommend it. Actually, it's a really fascinating book. But it makes me think about like, how could they have used AI? And it was during COVID. It was like on this little hospital on like Cape Cod or Martha's Vineyard or something like that, like a community hospital. It's truly a miracle that he survived. But it makes me think about the use of AI in those kinds of situations, and it's just interesting from a use case perspective. And I just thought that was an interesting point. It's not a question for the panel or anything like that. But just kind of like prompting some of that dialogue. So maybe we can talk a little bit about getting somewhat back to the human element and the workforce. Reskilling, upskilling, this has been something that has cropped up in a lot of today's conversations on the use of AI, on the use of emerging technologies. How do you keep up with that when everything is changing is something that I would be interested in exploring, especially the emerging technologies part, which is nebulous, but important to keep nebulous because you never know what the next most important emerging technology is going to be. Patrick, maybe do you have some thoughts on that or Karen, thoughts on that? I thought for DoD, it might be particularly, I know it's a hot button issue at DoD right now.
So we are looking at that. Look, AI is disruptive technology. The question is it good or can it be bad? And I really think there is going to be a lot of good, but there's going to be some bad that comes along with that. So how do we mitigate that and make changes, especially in the cyber arena? When we're looking to build our bench, we can't simply go out and hire fully made capability or ready capability people, right? Those people are actively employed and generally they're pretty well paid. So how do you get around these things? By identifying redundancies in your workforce, looking at various aptitudes and changing the way you think about acquiring talent. AI really helps us do that. But there's going to be instances where, so for example, if you've made your living by coding, all right, that's your primary job. You think about it now, and there's some industry statistics out there, that's looking like a dead end. You'll still need the ability to code, but you're also going to need to employ that with a computer science degree or some other things to come online. You just can't, well, I know how to code. That's great. AI can do it better and faster, at least to an 80% solution. So, how do I adjust and then take that skill set and some of the things we're doing says, okay, you have 75 or 50% of what I need is for one work role. And I'll lay that out using our AI capabilities. Like, here's your career path. Here's what you need to train to go into any one of 3 work roles. So you've got a basis to do that. That helps us. I like the word upskilling because reskilling, a lot of times we've had some experiences and some experiments across the federal government and say, we're going to take some people out. We're going to give them some training for, 8 weeks or a little longer, sprinkle some cyber on them, and they're going to go in and start. Right? It doesn't work that way. For cyber, you can't fake the funk. So it's about identifying what they are capable of and then, pushing them up into areas of usefulness. I look at this moment, it's very similar, I think, in terms of disruption, where we transition from a an agrarian society to an industrial society. This is going to be most disruptive to our knowledge industry and, the white collar world. So it's identifying what those changes are and then taking people that have always done or have been doing something, primarily it's no longer, it's become redundant, or AI has made it less profitable to stay there, and then pushing them into areas where they have a propensity to excel.
Can't fake the funk. That's the truth.
Yeah. Wasn't that a record
Dig it.
back in the 80s or 90s? I remember dancing in somebody's
still say
basement to
it.
blue lights. Anyway, I'd like to add to that because I love this topic, especially because it is one that is so at the forefront with the mandate and the vision of the new administration. One of the things that we've gotten into at the IRS and specifically in online services is doing horizon scans. Right. But first, you got to understand the problems that you're trying to solve. So it's not about, oh, let's go shop the latest, greatest AI or tool and try to force it into the agency. It's really understanding what are the problems that your agency, your division has, and then constantly scanning the, technology horizon to see if there's a solution that can be tested. And then as you look at, maybe you find one, maybe you don't, but even if you do or don't, then you have to look at what skill gaps. The first thing to reskilling or upskilling is what skills don't we have, and crosswalk that to people who have talent that could easily port or be upskilled. And then let's face it, sometimes in this massive digital transformation era, we've got to be honest with ourselves and recognize when there is just talent that won't work, because that spot, I call it, could be replaced with talent that will work. And so knowing how to deal with that and how to adjust it, sometimes it's just they're just not willing to learn or change, and that's okay. And sometimes it's they can't for whatever reason. And having conversations with whoever in your agency can help you deal with that so you make room for when you're talking about efficiency, it's not just about putting these, highly sought after, highly skilled employees in on top of employees that for whatever reason can't be effective. So I think, just in summary, understanding the problems that really need to be addressed, constantly scanning the horizon for variations or upgrades in current technology or new technology, then looking at the skill gaps to bring that in if you decide that's a good piece of technology or upgraded technology that you want to do, and make sure you can support it with the people. And that's where people become very important. And they're making the hard decisions sometimes, which no one likes to do. But I think if we look at what's going on now, it's trying to get to a place where we can effectively have the skills and the talent behind the technology to drive efficiency in workforce and in the government.
I agree super fully. All the things that they just described, where you do scans and then you identify gaps and then you do targeted upskilling to make sure people can do the next job they have or offer them other jobs they get into, is the entire function of the Aspire system. And my would not have spent 5 years building it if I didn't believe in it. That said, there's one thing that I think nobody's said yet, which I think is kind of maybe an option. Sometimes when technology comes to your place of work, either industry or geography, the option is to embrace with that technology. Sometimes an option is to flee, for lack of a better term, right? So I was talking to some folks in transportation a while ago about crane operation, right? Intermodal crane operators will be replaced with automation very soon. And that's very easy to do because the intermodal crane is on tracks in a controlled environment with a whole lot of communication systems that is talking with a ship that's not moving, that has a whole lot of communication systems, right? You know where they're not going to replace crane operators anytime soon? Logging. I challenge you to tell a computer to get a crane half propped on a fallen log without falling down a mountain to try to get logs to go, right? Emergency response situations, people using cranes and bulldozers and land movers for FEMA and things. You just, the variety of the context, the variety of the application, just too broad. So one option might be, hey, I'm a crane operator and AI is going to drive cranes and I want to do something else. Great. But maybe just maybe if you love driving cranes, there's probably still places that need crane operators that must be human. And I think that's not every industry. I think coding is a good example where that might not be true. I think Patrick's onto something, but there's a ton of stuff that's going to get automated sometimes in some places that have controlled environments or enough wealth or enough talent to make that happen. And then the rest of the world can still be your oyster, perhaps.
I mean, that's even true for the coding parts. Not all people code the same things, just like not all engineers are the same engineer. There is a lot that you're seeing on the internet now around vibe coding. There's a reason why my previous employer, Google, is trying to buy Wiz over there for like $32 billion because security is going to go crazy. So you're going to move from one part of coding into another part, depending on what is going to be needed at that time, right? It comes down to sort of the previous points. It's around policy and what is the outcomes you're trying to drive. These are tools, ultimately speaking. I mean, to answer some of the original part of the question, how do you keep up with everything changing so quickly? The open source community is putting stuff out every day. It's impossible for myself or others to keep up with it. The really cool part about it is it's very quickly being tried against many things, and the things that are kind of seeing some level of success is getting a lot of popularity through the AI we have today in social media that's ranking things, the responses on GitHub and the community and the crowdsource, right? So just seeing a lot of the large things coming out, like, not to get too far in the future, but in the last month, MCP is the coolest thing that's been out for a minute, and everyone's talking about it. And more importantly, it's all the major providers are trying to have their own perspective and show something on it. That's when you know you're onto something, and that's where you just follow that track basically. And so it's kind of like keeping up with Game of Thrones. If you tried following on like season 5 out of 9, you just got to take your time and keep up with it, but you'll catch up. So
And then be disappointed.
and disappointed, which is going to be true with some of the AI stuff too.
I
So.
thought it was so cool that my 10-year-old is learning to code in school. Like she was telling me about how they were coding a robot to draw a perfect circle. And I was like, that's so cool. And then I was like, it's actually not going to do you any good by the time you get old enough to actually do something with it. But maybe you guys are giving me a little bit of hope there.
So what I'd
No.
say will do them good is, and I think what we've said that AI can do a lot of things. One thing that arguably it doesn't do as well is the critical thinking, which humans can do. Do humans always critically think well? No, and that's something that I teach a class on critical thinking, and I think it's one of the hardest things I think to teach. But that's potentially where some effort could go. To enhance it, or just the fact of, hey, we need to focus on the critical thinking piece.
Good point. That is a good point. Critical thinking is something that will always be in demand and not something that can be automated, most likely. I don't know. We'll see. So we're getting close to wrapping things up. We don't have to do quite as fast of a lightning round as before, but I'll consider it a lightning round. We've talked a little bit about wins and challenges in some of the earlier panels, but we haven't touched on any kind of any personal or your own wins in the work that you're doing. Or I'll open it up to current challenges you're facing too. Speaking of crowdsourcing, maybe we can crowdsource this, this part of the solution for you. But what is a win or a challenge that you've got on your plate right now? And I'll start here in the room with Tony.
Okay. A win. I'm going to say it one last time. Aspire's cool. nps.edu/aspire. Go look it up. For a challenge, actually, this plugs into some of this is like, the critical thinking that humans do or the jobs that humans do that AI can't do. One of the challenges that I'm hearing about, let's say, is like as AI makes it clear to us who those humans are. Let's take in the the medical standpoint, a biostatistician, right, to be the human in the loop with a diagnostic or epidemiological AI. Not a lot of biostatisticians. Not really an in-demand profession for a long time. Very few and far between. Very hard to get qualified and demands a ton of money. All right, now that we've pushed AI to do a ton of the work for us, we need those humans in the loop. We figured out the humans in the loop are biostatisticians and went, oopsie. Can't find them, can't pay them. So I think that's going to be a big challenge. And can we use AI to fix it and upskill? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe there are certain levels of expertise that are needed that are just beyond the ability of us to create through anything other than traditional education at this time. And if we keep making AI in a way to put those particular high-skilled individuals, which again are rare and expensive, into demand, it could be a significant and compounding problem, particularly for the public sector.
Okay.
I'd say a win. We had a large program, and the government, DARPA, invested in us, and we had time, gave us the time to work through a lot of issues, things like that we're talking about today: data diversity, model diversity, bias, provenance, CI/CD, drift, things like that. So I think just having the time and thinking about all the things that need to be thought about. For a challenge, one thing that we're working on, a project we're working on now, which I think is interesting, is potentially using, and we talk about the lack of expertise or the disappearing of expertise, is how do we potentially use AI, or when people are using AI, it's also educating them on the expertise that they will need to become the experts.
A win for us. We have an incredibly accurate, highly controllable, can be deployed air gapped system for these types of things, which there's a lot of groups out there, including previous people I worked with that work on these problems. It's very difficult to get that in one package. The challenge is any important information in the world is typically locked behind a whole bunch of other processes and operations. It's old. It like that's just the inherency of it. And so the challenge is trying to get these things connected together in a workflow, in operations that scales, that works. And that's kind of what we continue to hammer at.
Okay. Karen, do you have anything?
Karen, you're on mute.
No.
I would say some of the wins and losses, it's basically going to be the same, right? For the agency and for the office, risk tolerance and risk adverse, right? So we have become, with the evolution of AI, more risk tolerant, which is a win as we look at how it brings efficiency and helps protect fraud and protect our data and people's personal information. But there's still a level of risk adversity that's going to prevent us from moving as quickly in this space. But I think as time goes on and we continue to grow in this space, that tolerance will rise and the adversity will lower.
Patrick?
And agree with Karen. My wins are really simple. Just being able to bring some of these tools online. It is such a challenge just to get an ATO. If you're going to bring something in, it can take a year or longer. We're, as far as adoption, when we compare it to industry, we're at least 3 years behind where we need to be in terms of how we deploy. There's such an obsession with, well, we've got to be careful on the cybersecurity side. On one net, we're willing to build Skynet. On the other side, we're like, oh no, we don't want to get involved, DeepSeek and some other things. So working through that, and it's the acceptance part where they're like, okay, you've demonstrated that you've got isolated models that show great promise. Go ahead and use that. The challenge is, persuading people, these are the things it does well. If we turn it on, it's not the end of the world, and the risk is manageable. We need to move faster, and that piece of it is a really, really big challenge. Everyone seems to, and if you talk to somebody, and if you've ever been in sales or along those ways, the quality of the objection will give you an idea. Do you really have concerns, or is it, I'm just afraid of this thing? And, getting through those conversations, because you listen and say, that's not really a concern, right? Well, let's just get down to brass tacks. You just don't want to turn it on, is you don't want to do something different. Combining that with the naturally slow process, that goes with government has been a challenge. The good news is we're waking up to that. Yes, the administration is putting emphasis on this, moving faster. We were already ahead of the game. So in a way, I've been kind of freed up to kind of go after things that we were already pursuing. And some of those shackles have been lifted.
Great. I think that's actually, and it's a great note to close on. I think that this has been an incredibly fascinating conversation. We came in to talk about driving efficiency and effectiveness, and maybe it didn't sound like most panels that you go and listen to about, efficiency and effectiveness. But I would argue that you can't be more efficient and more effective, and especially in things that are inherently human involved in making changes. Without these kind of open conversations where we're able to kind of just talk to each other, hear about each other's, problems, challenges, solutions, experiences, and be able to share that. And I think that it made for a really fascinating dialogue today. So thank you all for that. Very interesting, really great stuff. Thank you guys. I hope you guys will all join me in thanking our excellent panel today.
All right. So we just heard about IT modernization of the workforce, AI modernization of the workforce. Now we're going to talk about AI in the service of IT modernization. Our panelists are, where's Mike Prado? Okay, number one, how do you do? Prado or Prado? Prado, that's what I figured. He's Deputy Assistant Director for the DHS Cyber Crime Center at the Department of Homeland Security. Good to have you with us. Landon Shaw, where are you? And hi. Senior Enterprise Architect for Enterprise Operations Center at the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts. And no Doge coming into the court system because that's a different branch of the government. Dan Buckholtz. That's right. Yeah. Okay.
That's
It's
me.
on the screen. He's right in front of me. He's the Red Cell Unit Chief. As he says, he's got a bloody good job at the Bureau of Diplomatic Security at the Department of Agriculture.
No,
And
state.
Yeah, well, what I'm reading here, it says agriculture, and I knew
Oh,
it was
no.
state. And there's an old function, a human function in broadcasting. It doesn't matter if you're in speaking mode, you're talking. If you're in reading mode, you're reading. And there's a famous incident of a WTOP traffic reporter during a snowstorm reading a script and said, and so and so and so and so, and he said, stop here unless there's more coming into your screen. He said that on the air because you're reading, you read everything. So it says agriculture, and I knew it was state, and we're glad you could be here. And finally, we have Wale Moses. He's the Chief AI Officer at Microsoft Federal. Wale, nice to have you with us. Microsoft, one of the durable companies in this market. I remember when I do remember when there was no Microsoft. And I remember Microsoft at the stage when Bill Gates would come and go to a room full of Army officers trying to sell them stuff. So they've come a long way, baby, as they say. All right, so again, our topic is the AI modernization of IT itself. And we had a lot of formal questions and we had a lot of informal topics that we really wanted to get with. And so I'm going to start with the informal topics we really wanted to get with, and that's going to bring me to Dan, who's on screen, looking dapper with a really nice headset. And part of AI in the service of AI modernization has to do with data and staying within the data of your department in which you train AI to protect that data and so forth. So we can all comment on that, but Dan, I'm going to have you start with that theme of the data as the foundation to modernization and its relation to AI.
Well, the data is very important to us because we wanted to make sure that the information stayed inside the department. It didn't get revealed out to the outside world, and that didn't get polluted with information that would cause potential delusions or hallucinations in the AI. So we've been very, very aggressive in getting our state chat out to the department, which allows our people to do any number of things. So it allows that we're pulling more data in today. I think just today we dropped a new piece that allows people to review and search and understand all the executive orders that are coming out. So it provides that feedback for our employees who are very forward leaning, and we want to make sure that they are using our tools and not going outside and causing that information to be lost outside of the department.
And you also have the physical challenge of the degree to which people are geographically scattered. And that's still a real issue, isn't it?
It is. We are still modernizing our network. Zero trust is our big buzzword, of course. So we're still, but as of right now, most of our data all comes from Timbuktu all the way back into the DC area and then out. So it causes a lot of load and long lag time for our employees. So we're trying to speed things up for them as much as possible.
And by the way, are you at work in an office today, or is that a virtual background so they think you are?
No, I'm at work. I'm at our office in Roslyn. So I had to stay in town for my wife's birthday. So.
All right, excellent. Well, glad you could be with us virtually. And we're going to go through a couple of use cases here. We're going to end up, my final opening speaker is going to be Wale. He's going to give us the view across government for what you're seeing in terms of use cases. But during our discussions, Mr. Prado, this is your last name, Mike came up with, I really got to work on my notes here. Mike Prado, Dan is Buckholz, okay, he's State Department, he's Homeland Security, came up with the idea of, or suggested the idea of you're using AI in the area of applications related to transnational crime, red teaming. You've been working with Microsoft on this. Tell us what's going on and how that relates to the modernization of your applications.
Yeah, happy to. So we're doing a lot at the DHS Cybercrime Center and within DHS as a whole, but from a cybercrime perspective, we are kind of, for lack of a better term, tip of the spear when it comes to law enforcement. So it's incumbent upon us to look at not only what we can do to modernize and enhance our own efficiencies internally, but probably equally or more important, how to address and combat the adversarial use of AI by criminal organizations, as you mentioned, transnational criminal organizations being our primary focus. What we are seeing is a significant amount of fraud, significant amount of cyber-dependent crime, leveraging AI tools, working in conjunction with hackers that are have the necessary skill sets to be able to affect a ransomware event or network intrusion. Working across the federal law enforcement landscape, the international law enforcement landscape, which is hugely important, and equally important, the private sector. As you mentioned, we do a lot of red teaming internally with responsible companies that are developing AI. The problem is that and I was having the discussion earlier, the kind of box has been opened to steal somebody's language, but it's something that's already out there. And having the ability to try to not only forecast what the next problem is going to be, but deal with the here and now of the use of AI to affect this, whether it's chatbots, whether it's voice to image, text to image types of platforms that enable the creation of child exploitation material, the coding of malware, again, the facilitation of fraud by mimicking voice or even image in some cases. These are all things that we're dealing with at the DHS Cybercrime Center. It's somewhat of an uphill battle because government does move at a different pace than what our adversaries can and are able to do. But I think we're making significant inroads, and I think it's that collaborative network that I alluded to with private sector, international, and domestic law enforcement collaborating and working hand in hand to address.
And is what you're doing specifically then a data analytical program?
So that's a little bit different. So what we're doing, we're dealing with the threats as they happen and even before they happen. But what we're also doing at the same time is enhancing our ability to analyze data. Because what I think differentiates law enforcement in particular is we have to obviously maintain the integrity of the data that we create, the data that we utilize on the day-to-day basis to actually affect our jobs. But we're constantly, even now as I'm speaking, there's no doubt agents in the field who have a lot more fun job than I do these days. They're out kicking doors in, seizing data, seizing devices. We have to take that data. We, at the Cybercrime Center, we oversee our 450 or so computer forensic examiners around the country and around the world. Take it to a lab, or in many cases now, take it to the mobile lab that's there on site. Extract that data, get around the encryption, deal with the encryption, ensure that that data can be thoroughly and responsibly containerized, extracted in a way that doesn't contaminate our systems, but also utilizing AI tools in particular now that we have been able to acquire to very rapidly go through that data so that we can make a prosecutorial determination whether or not we have enough evidence to take to a U.S. Attorney's office or a Commonwealth Attorney's office for prosecution. So it's kind of it's a two-way street that we have to deal with on both ends.
All right, and just a real quick follow-up, and then we'll move on, and that is, what is the output of the algorithm that is presented to analysts or operators Is it a generative output where they say, look here or look there? Or I mean, what do they
Yeah.
get from it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it depends on the type of crime. So, without going into too much detail, a lot of what we investigate is, let's say, child exploitation. How we handle those investigations, which is very image dependent, is much different than what our network intrusion agents are looking into, looking for specific code, for example, or our money laundering investigations that are going over voluminous amounts of data. So the AI models that we employ will specifically sort of, meld themselves to the specific crime set, right? So again, taking child exploitation, being able to not only look for images that are illegal, but more importantly, how the models are able to then take images that may not be illegal, but may have very similar imagery in the background, image recognition, pattern recognition, for example, because what we're ultimately trying to do is find not only the fact that somebody has illicit images that are going to land them in prison, but more importantly, try to find the victim in the case of child exploitation. And so there may be a picture on a hard drive of a blanket that was seen in another set of images taken from an investigation on the other side of the country or even around the world. And linking those two cases together is something that the AI tools that we have are able to do for us. And it's been a pretty big game changer.
Yeah, and that must happen at speed. I can remember some FBI famous cases where they could analyze fabric in a hotel room, and they knew regionally where that fabric was manufactured, and therefore where the hotel might have been, where the crime took place, and on and on and on until they could get to amazingly specific locations. But it took a long time. This might be able to speed that up so that your analytical capabilities are.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Right.
again, to put it in context, the data that we seized just last year and analyzed was 7.9 petabytes of data. That's just seized data. And so without these tools, we don't have enough personnel on the payroll to even go through all of that
Sure.
at any sort of pace that's necessary.
Okay, and Landon Shaw, give us a little picture of what happens at the administrative office of the U.S. courts. And then let's talk about what you had mentioned too, and that is the research function and the fact that there is so much case law, so much history that goes into a court decision, which has to be based on soundness, was what your theme was. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, at the courts, we have a tremendous amount of data also, all the federal court cases. Historically, all historical cases and new cases, everything's filed electronically for any federal court. So that's bankruptcy, pretrial probation, appellate and district courts. So, and that's for every court in the country and also in the world that the U.S. has a province. So it's a lot of data. So at the judiciary, we have tons of data that's historical data and then new data coming in all the time. So specifically, what a lot of the groups and working groups within the judiciary are looking at are how do we process that large amount of data and make sense of it and then search it and have it be accurate, have the results be accurate. So we've got working groups throughout the country that are working on different types of projects utilizing AI and tools to try to process that data. And when I say that, these are like informal working groups. And the type of data that they're looking at, it has to do with not only the case data, but then we have lawyers and clerks that are processing different types of data, either historical for their research, researching laws. There's a lot that's happening throughout the country because each circuit is really, and each court they're kind of doing their own individual research within this AI arena. And I think that the thing that's probably going to be the biggest challenge moving forward is making sure that people utilize local AI in the form of like MCP servers, right? Like specifically, I think that the data the queries going out to the cloud, some of the data queries that we have, we would not want to go out to the cloud. not just using like a large language model, but kind of like when the developers, or at least a lot of the developers that I've been communicating with, when they're writing their test AI applications, they're using like an IDE, something like Cursor or Windsurf. Those are a couple IDEs. That Rue is another one. And essentially what they're doing is they're taking these frameworks like this IDE framework, which allows you to integrate different types of agents. The thing that I think that's going to be the problem is we don't necessarily want these agents to be in the cloud. And what I'm afraid of is that a lot of the development that's going to go on in federal government will start utilizing cloud agents. And the developers may not necessarily know that these agents, where they are, they're going to be around the world in different locations. They may not necessarily know what data is being transmitted to them. And so I think my biggest concern for the future for government is that if we're going to utilize agents, those agents should probably be internal to the organization. You might be able to leverage a large language model that's outside in the cloud, but you want your agents that are like web scraping agents or agents that look at data on your local machines or in your own local databases, that check your own vector data stores on-prem, that have your documents. Those MCP agents should be internal to your organization. That would be Landon's opinion, right? The problem with the not using a large language model that's in the cloud is that a lot of people just simply don't have the resources to run, several 100 billion parameter models, because you just don't have the hardware to do that. But what you can do is run an MCP server, multiple MCP servers within your organization, and then leverage those large language models that are in the cloud on these big platforms. That's something that you can do, and that would be one guardrail that could be put in place for safety. So that's
Yeah, so a lot
That's what
going
I'm
on.
saying.
All
Yeah.
right, excellent. And this is a 3-branch event today, because we also have John Salamone, who's the Chief Human Capital Officer, I hope I'm right, the Office of the Chief Administrative Officer of the U.S. House of Representatives. So we have the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and the executive branch. I don't think that's ever happened in 30 years of doing panels in this market. So good to have you with us. Good, the organization that everybody loves to hate, but there's actually stuff happening in the House of Representatives on the technology front that's exciting.
A lot of great things going on at the House from a technology standpoint. I feel a little bit like an imposter being up here as the HR representative on a very technical panel. I'll say one of the things that I've been doing with my team, so as the Chief Human Capital Officer at the House, we're responsible for conducting outreach to colleges and universities. We have thousands of interns that come into the institution every single year. We know that 17% of the interns stay on and get full-time positions in the institution. So one of the things I did was put ChatGPT through its paces about 2 weeks ago. I went through, we are building a database of colleges and universities across the country. We started with those that have HSI, so Hispanic institutions, historically Black institutions, other affinity institutions, and I started to ask ChatGPT to give me colleges and universities in Maryland. And it gave me, in about 15 seconds, all the colleges and universities. Then I asked it the next question. Can you give me the addresses, websites, and career services email addresses, if possible? And in about 35 seconds, it released that information. Then I asked it to organize it by congressional district and members of Congress. And it was able to do that, and I was able to get it replicated for 2 or 3 states, Maryland, Virginia, Alabama, and then I got greedy. And I asked it to do it for the entire United States, and I think I broke ChatGPT because it was not able to give me the information that I was looking for. But we are using it to save time. My team conducts briefings for students, a briefing called Careers in Congress. We are going to be sending this briefing out virtually so that colleges and universities have it in their career centers on demand. And we're going to be using the database that we've been building, and we're going to do it state by state, but it's still going to save us a tremendous amount of time for outreach to college and university students across country.
All right. And we should also point out the workforce of the Congress of the United States. It's small by some of the big agency standpoints. It's what, about 30,000 staff members for the 535 members. But it's often overlooked. And in many ways, it's one of the most important workforces in the entire country, because it is that workforce which educates and informs the members on what it is they have to vote about, because they don't know everything. And the reason they know anything is that staff. So I have always appreciated that staff, and I don't think enough Americans do or even understand what it does, but it's there, 30,000 strong. Okay, Wale from Microsoft, I guess you're our co-pilot for today. Besides telling us how we can turn that off once in a while, tell us from the federal standpoint, what is going on? What are you seeing in terms of the use cases for IT modernization and generally modernization from your standpoint, because you're everywhere?
Yep. Yeah. So thanks for having me. So in my role, I get a chance to work across the federal government and understand use cases in terms of how AI will be beneficial in helping agencies get work done faster, be more productive, and to be more effective overall. And listening to some of the use cases that have already been detailed, it's great because we actually have had a chance to work with, I think, every single agency here. Dan, State Department is one of the agencies I've been really impressed with. State Department leaned into using AI very quickly. From what I understand, there was leadership at the very top of the agency that really drove a lot of that usage and drove visibility, which further encouraged others to develop AI use cases. Overall, if I look across what we're seeing in government, there's really, if I try to boil it down simply, 3 different ways we're seeing agencies use AI, and specifically generative AI. So agencies are using generative AI to analyze, to modernize, and to improve citizen engagement. And so in terms of analysis, a lot of use cases that really deal with, if you think about all the data, the unstructured data, the documents that agencies have, one of the magical things about generative AI is its ability to understand and process unstructured data, documents and information that previously it took a human to reason over. And so a lot of use cases relate to that, whether it's agencies using generative AI in the rulemaking process to go through and read through, interpret, and do sentiment analysis on public comments, something that previously we needed a human to do. Agencies, I guess I'll give you a shout out. Dan, State Department is using generative AI to process and analyze contracts, and many other agencies are doing things similar. Again, something else that it previously took a human to do. If you think about an agency with thousands or hundreds or thousands of contracts, and you're looking for specific details that you need to pull out across all those contracts, the ability of generative AI to do that and reduce the time it takes for people for that task to be done from months to days or weeks is a game changer. And then, so anyway, lots of use cases around just looking at all the data that agencies have and pulling out details. As a matter of fact, today I had a conversation with one of our internal team members, and I'm not going to call it the agency, but the use case related to legal document analysis. And so this agency does a lot of litigation. They have a lot of case files, similar to what you talked about, Landon. And in some of the prosecutions they do, they need to go through and review and pull out information. It takes them in most cases an average of 2.5 weeks to go out and find that information. Using generative AI, they've now been able to do it in 10 seconds, the average time. So just all this data, think about all the data you have, being able to analyze it at scale and reduce the time. So analysis is one category. The next category is modernization. And so what this has to do with is the legacy within agencies, legacy applications, legacy desktop applications, all the way to mainframes. So we're working with agencies across the board. A lot of agencies, a lot of mainframes still out in the federal government. Most of those are written in COBOL. My mom was a COBOL programmer in the 80s. She has since retired, as of most COBOL programmers. And so the ability of generative AI to understand legacy code, and first of all, to document that code, explain what it's doing, and then to help you convert it to a modern code base. Lots of different agencies using generative AI in that sense. And then the other thing I'd say about modernization is a lot of these low-code, no-code frameworks are now entering the picture, and they integrate with they're easy on-ramps to using generative AI. And so from a Microsoft perspective, we have the Power Platform, makes it Power Platform and Copilot Studio, which makes it really easy to build generative AI applications, which are built on top of large language models. The last category I talked about was improving citizen engagement. And so we're seeing agencies do things like stand up chatbots on their external websites to communicate with citizens. So that's one example. My favorite example is with an agency that was experiencing a lot of criticism from Congress and from citizen advocacy groups around long call wait times into their call center. But the problem is that they didn't really have an understanding of what was driving those long call times, because you have to listen to a lot of call recordings to do that. And so therein lies, again, the opportunity for generative AI. And so in the case of this particular agency, they use our voice to text AI to transcribe those call center calls from voice into voice transcriptions. And then they use generative AI against hundreds of thousands of calls. And for the first time, they arrived at an understanding of about what was driving the majority of those call center calls into their call center. In their case, in this particular agency's case, this agency sends out lots of notices to citizens. And apparently those notices were not well written, because the number one reason people were calling in is because they were saying, hey, I got this notice and I don't understand it. And so step 2 of the process for the agencies, they're going to now use generative AI to rewrite those notices to make them more understandable for citizens, thus deflecting away some of those calls. Just a few examples across the broad scope of use cases we're seeing.
Yes, and a couple follow-ups there. That particular one you mentioned, you can optimize your call centers a great deal when you can route things and put them in priority and so forth. So it's not a brute force method. And you mentioned too that it turns out something was written badly. And I don't find the notices from SSA so hard to understand, but the idea that if there's a recurrent problem, it's not with the citizen, it's with this crummy form or this bad thing. And that used to take sometimes months or years to discover, wait a minute, this form is really confusing. It's not all these dummies out there trying to fill it out. This can be sped up.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
I mean,
so that's one example. But along those lines, there are other agencies we're working with to use AI to improve their communications to citizens on their websites. So there's a particular agency who it's actually NIH, so they've been public about it. And so a lot of the communications on their website, actually, sorry, it was CDC. Some of their citizen-facing communications were maybe overly technical in the way that they were communicating. And so they wanted to calibrate that to make it more understandable for their audience. And so many agencies, in fact, are working on similar initiatives around improving the way they communicate with citizens.
You just have to keep the lawyers out of review, and then the communications will come out in plain English.
Absolutely.
Golly nibs, is anybody awake out there today? Got a great panel here. Okay, good. And then just a follow-up question, maybe Dan, you can also join in here. The contract analysis question that Wale brought up, or that use case. Earlier this morning, we had the question of semantics, which mean different words meaning different things in different contexts. And that's certainly true in contracting if the requirements of the contract are in that language. And it also, in some sense, I would think gets into the topic of prompt engineering so that you ask the right thing. So my question, maybe Dan and Wale can answer this, is if you are going to do analysis of a bunch of contracts to discover something, it's necessary to train your model with only your contracts. Because if it was trained on your states plus Defense Department, I can think of 1,000 words that would be semantically inappropriate for state in an AI sense, that is. And so maybe comment on the right degree of training data.
Well, I imagine at least from a very perspective that we have very specific contracting rules. We have the SFARs, whereas you have the defense people have the DFARs. So that's sort of those things where you kind of have to make sure it's trained on the right language.
Yeah, so I would say it depends. I mean, so large language models are very flexible in their ability to understand. So essentially, the way they've been trained is they've seen a lot of data, and so um, all these things are subject to testing. If you want to get the best results, you would do something called fine tuning to your specific data. But in some cases, we've been astounded by the flexibility of the models to really get good results based on just maybe something that we think they're being introduced to for the first time.
Okay. And well, another follow-up question for Landon in the courts area. I'm sorry, this question is for John in the House of Representatives. This came up the other day in an interview that each member is kind of like a small business of its own. It has its own staff, its own budget, and the people hire their own staffs. But there are issues that cross every office, and yet they deal with them as all these little siloed 535 offices. I think there's an effort underway in Congress to try to at least not take over that function from the offices, because that's like grabbing, a fish out of somebody's hands, but to get an analytical view of it by combining data from common taxpayer concerns or call-in concerns, casework concerns that happen across the offices. Maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, so that is happening in multiple ways in the institution, and I can speak specifically about what my team is doing to help modernize the HR function. So each one of those offices, they are their own employing authority. We don't want to take that function away from them at all. But we do want to provide them with better data, better information, better resources so they can streamline their processes. When you have 18 people that work in your staff, that's all that they are allowed to hire, both in DC and in the district offices. There's not a lot of time to focus on the management functions. So what we're trying to do is provide the resources that the offices need to have better performance management goals, to have position descriptions, resources that they might not necessarily have, and they can use technology to help them draft performance goals. They can use technology and the resources that we have to help streamline some of the hiring processes that they put into place. And there are other avenues across the institution, the clerk, the sergeant at arms, my organization, the chief administrative officer, our organization runs the IT backbone for the institution. I have a very small role in helping modernize the HR function for the member offices, leveraging technology, leveraging best practices, and meandering into the use of AI. And so it's really exciting. We're leaning in. I like to tell my team we need to do the doable here. We can't take on too much. We have to be smart about the way that we approach these programs and these processes, and we have to make sure that what we're providing to the offices is valid, it's reliable, and it's based on good business practices where technology can help streamline them for these organizations or for these offices.
Yes, because members especially are getting record numbers of calls now from constituents because the agencies are having trouble answering phones. And there's probably commonality, that they could share if they could share it.
Absolutely.
All right. And Mike Prado, a question for you with respect to this data analysis. So many agencies, State Department, other elements of Homeland Security, the Defense Department has a DC-3, also Cybercrime Center, that are in the law enforcement area. I mean, when you read a Justice Department press release, they mention IRS, 7 or 8 agencies involved in nailing somebody for some crime somewhere, including, the U.S. attorneys are just part of it, or, they pick it up from there. What about the confederation of these tools and technologies that you're developing such that there can be some efficiency out of it and everybody can use this, because it's essentially the same process?
It is.
My thesis, but you tell
sure.
me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say you're wrong. I think that there is some complexities there. You're absolutely right. Very few large investigations at the federal level are single siloed to one particular agency. And that same holds true for HSI and DHS-led investigations because they're transnational in nature. So not only are you involving a multitude of federal law enforcement agencies, sometimes you have state and local law enforcement agencies, and certainly foreign law enforcement agencies as well. So that does create an issue in, at what level and what level of access you can grant to certain amounts of data. The task force model is always the best generally, where you're read into everybody and cleared. Everybody's cleared to see the same information, but that's one area of caution because especially from the law enforcement perspective. I say this at almost every presentation that I'm a part of. We have to be extremely careful with the data and with the access to that data as government agents. And what I mean by that is our role is to enforce the laws as part of the executive branch, but from a deprivation of liberty, right? We're basically the cases and the investigations that we conduct. The goal is to disrupt and dismantle criminal organizations and make victims whole in whatever way we can. But ultimately, it's going to result, if we do our jobs right, putting somebody in prison for a very, very long time, ideally, if the crime is serious enough. And generally, we don't expend our limited resources on minor crimes. So we have to ensure that we're not sharing data too widely. I mean, there's grand jury issues that are at play. So there's numerous rules of evidence. All of this has to kind of be that framework that we utilize this fantastic new technology that is available to us, but in a way that's responsible, that keeps agents, people in the loop to make those decisions. We're not making probable cause determinations, for example, based on AI. We're not making other determinations that result in enforcement actions, identifications of individuals based on AI. We have a multitude of and variety of biometric tools, for example, facial recognition. And most of you probably know the seriousness and some of the concerns, valid concerns on some missteps by other law enforcement agencies using facial recognition technology. We use facial recognition technology in certain investigations that are run from the DHS Cybercrime Center, but never to make that determinative process or decision that is the individual that committed this particular crime. It's simply a pointer system that enables us to follow up on a lead. So exchanging that information is very difficult, but again, I'd say it's the task force model where I get the same information as my counterpart at the FBI and my counterpart at the DEA, for example, but that's not every case. We have to obviously protect our sources and methods, and a lot of times we're using informants and things like that. So it's a pretty dicey situation.
Well, we're glad you're on the job, that's for sure. And I had another follow-up for Landon Shaw at the courts. I mean, judges have processes and procedures that go back. I mean, they don't wear powdered wigs in the United States, but it's a fairly tradition-bound activity. So what is the strategy for getting the very tooth of the courts, the judges, the people that are going to give those long sentences to the people that Homeland Security turns in and Justice turns in, such that they can make better decisions or better understand the context of a case than what they're presented through with lawyers and the research they can traditionally do?
Yeah, I can't speak for the agency. I'll have to speak for my personal opinion on this one because there's nothing formally that's been announced for that specific topic. But with regards to the judges, with what I'm working on myself, which is more like API, using AI to generate API code for monitoring and things like that. So I'm actually working on code stuff. But for judges, I think the biggest challenge is going to be having an AI give an answer, like a large language model, provide an answer that a judge will trust. Because I think that there's going to be there's this problem that people probably heard about missing in the middle, where when you load large documents into a large language model, very often it does a really good job of identifying components that are at the beginning of the document or at the end of the document, but details that occur within the middle sometimes get lost. So it's this this problem of context being lost in the middle. And because of this, judges are going to be they're going to be skeptical. They're going to be skeptical anyway of an AI doing it, not their trusted law clerk. That's going to be one thing, right? But even in the Supreme Court, they have the same type of thing. They have a lot of law clerks that go through orders. They'll write up orders initially. The judge will go and proof them. But a lot of the research is being done by not the judge, right? And I think that in this case, we're probably going to start seeing people using AI to generate orders. I don't think it's necessarily going to be an order that the judge would sign, but I think that the complexity with the judges are going to be that most judges are older and they have a lot of experience and they're extremely sharp. Like judges are probably some of the sharpest people that I've ever met. And I think that the problem is going to be is convincing the judge to take something that a computer spit out and actually use it. And so although it can be proofed, words in law are meaningful, and one wrong word, it changes the context of that order. So I think that's going to be the hardest part for specifically judges. Like personally, I just know I've worked with them for 13 years now, and their clerks, and things have to be exact. And the words have to be perfect. And I'm afraid that the judges are going to be one of the last ones to adopt, personally, just
Sure,
knowing
sure.
how a lot of the judges have operated. I would think that they may be there, although there are some super tech savvy judges, many of them are going to be skeptical, would be my
Yep.
my personal guess.
I remember how shocked everyone was on television to see Judge Lance Ito using a laptop during the O.J. Simpson trial. That seemed revolutionary at the time, and it was on television. If your kids look it up, what happened then. All right, final question, we'll go down the line, was prompted by John, your anecdote about blowing up ChatGPT. And my question for everyone to answer, and I'll start with you, is in using AI, and we've been pretty much talking generative, what's the big challenge in making sure that employees confronted with that prompt line, used to be, what do you do on a DOS prompt line? Now it's what you do on a ChatGPT prompt line, that the people have the understanding on how to do a proper prompt, which is one of the big challenges in AI. We could probably have a whole conference on that, but just give us 30 seconds on getting your employees there.
30 seconds. I'll say for me personally, early adopter, trying the technology for the first time, it's trial and error, right? And what you put in, it's going to be garbage in, garbage out, and you have to learn as much as the machine is learning from you. So for me, it was a very telling experience to ask for 3 states, and then I asked for all 50. I got greedy. And I think you just have to be careful about getting greedy. And I think to Landon's point, like it's important to use the technology. And I wrote it down, the missing in the middle. We have to make sure that we're trusting and verifying the information that we're getting out. Just because I have a list of colleges and universities, it doesn't mean it's right. So we're spot checking just to make sure.
You can't give everyone a sewing machine and get straight hems all the time, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that, what would be a good answer for this? I would say that one of the best things that you can do is when you prompt, when you're developing your prompt, you should be extremely specific and verbose, and treat the AI like you were a director of a group of method actors. I know that sounds a little strange, but here's what it would be like. If you had a bunch of actors and you were directing these actors, you would say something like, let me give you your motivation. You are an AI and you're supposed to be very helpful. And I want you to be extremely specific when you provide responses. Your responses should be verbose, and I'd like you to cite your sources. This is literally your prompt, okay? Your prompt could be a paragraph long. And it should be, because the more specific you are with the AI, the better answers you're going to receive. So treat the AI like a method actor, where you're giving the AI motivation, and you're citing the guidelines and the guardrails and what the expected response is. I'm being specific where I'm saying,
Sure.
I think you should give a paragraph to the AI as what you expect in an answer. And doing that, you'll get way better responses if you treat the AI like a person.
All right. Don't be the 10 billionth person to ask it the meaning of life. Dan?
I think from our perspective, we already had an audience that was deeply receptive and ready to do it, and they were already going off and doing their own thing until we kind of shut them down and shaped them into our guarded state chat environment. So we're trying to get them as much stuff as they can as possible, and then also making sure that they're getting the education and having some learning aids to help them get along and make use of it, because foreign service people are very very aggressive, and they see what other people can do, and they want it now.
Okay, thank you. And Wole, how do you be the left-hand pilot to your co-pilot?
So the first thing I'll say is the AI that you're using today is the worst version it'll ever be. So just keep that in mind. The capabilities are advancing at an astonishing pace. And in terms of guidance I would give folks, first of all, I love your method acting metaphor, Landon. So a couple of things I think is important to do: basic training, AI literacy training. Generative AI in particular is new for folks, and so there'll be inconsistent ways that people use it in the organization. So training on prompting is one example, but then also training on the fact that in many cases you'll need to check sources and citations, and so that's important. The other part of the training that I think that will become increasingly important is role and function specific training. And so, for example, if I work in HR, how do I use Microsoft 365 Copilot to create a position description and do the classification? If I work in procurement, how do I use Copilot to review contracts? So the general training, but then also the training specific to your role that will help you accelerate and automate and be more productive.
Okay, final word to Mike Prado.
Yeah, just real quick, I would say, again, from a law enforcement perspective, it's AI is here to stay, especially these models that enable us to use them as a pointer system, but it's merely a tool, a powerful tool, but a tool like unlike any that we have ever really had access to. But it's important to understand, especially again, from a law enforcement perspective, ChatGPT or any other large language model or generative AI system isn't going to go testify in court for you, isn't going to go in front of a judge and swear out an affidavit that's necessary to, under oath affirm that, because you've observed and learned A, B, C, D, and E, now you can have enough probable cause to go in and knock somebody's door down or pull them over and haul them to jail and haul them in front of a judge. So because we're making these big decisions, yes, ChatGPT and others can point us in the right direction, but we have to keep a person in the loop to verify that information and ensure that we're going after the right people or the right organization.
All right, well, I want to thank this panel. Some great information, some really good specific advice. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you very much.